Okay. Hello, everyone. In this lecture, we will talk about personal information security, the security of your data, your accounts, and your devices. Most people now are aware of the best practices. Choose strong passwords, use licensed software, don't click on untrusted links, etc., etc., etc. However, people don't follow these best practices. Why? The first reason is they underestimate either the probability or the consequences of an attack. The second reason is they make a wrong trade-off between convenience and security. And this is a trade-off that everyone makes, either consciously or unconsciously. And, well, actually, convenience is the only legit reason to disregard the best practices. To make a conscious decision, you should think of what could happen. Think about your followers that may see inappropriate content in your social networks. Think about your relatives who may be targeted by those who have access to your accounts. Think about your employees or your employer. Corporate espionage often starts with compromising one of the employees. No one can assess the possible consequences better than you. And overall, information security is all about risk management. We want to assess the risks and minimize them as possible. However, there are some risks that we can't minimize anymore without sacrificing our convenience. In this case, we can either avoid, transfer these risks, or take them. Much as we don't jump off a plane without a parachute, we shouldn't install some knowingly malicious software on our computer or some keyguns and cracks that will unlock the proprietary software, because the risk of compromising our computer is high, and the likelihood is high as well. We'd better avoid this risk. Another example is, imagine you have a lot of money on your bank account and you use your phone to transfer money from this account. In this case, although you have taken all the necessary precautions, you have set the strong password on your bank account and you type it every time you need to transfer your money, there is still some chance, it's quite low, but there is still some, that the attacker can get access to your bank account. In this case, we'd better transfer this risk. We'd better buy some insurance that will cover our expenses in case our bank account is compromised. And there is a third category of risks that we can take. The convenience versus security trade-off for these risks is very high, and we prefer convenience, and this is perfectly okay. The only important thing here is that it should be a conscious decision, and you should assess and estimate these risks. Okay, so here's the example. If someone gets access to my PC, I'm a developer, and I'm contributing to a lot of repositories. And if someone gets access to my PC, he will be able to push some commits that introduce vulnerabilities in the software I develop. Well, there are some strategies that can help me reduce this risk. I can talk to my colleagues to establish the security practices in my company. We should, for example, protect the master branch so that no code gets there without a review. We should require commit signatures, and we should require several approvals so that many people can look at the proposed changes and either accept them or reject them. In this case, even if someone pushes the malicious code on my behalf, the others will notice it. We can also reduce the probability of this attack. For example, I can add password to my SSH key file so that even if an attacker is able to get access to my PC, he will not be able to get access to the repository. Or alternatively, or or better, in conjunction with the previous measures, I can lock my PC after a certain period of inactivity, so that even if I leave my laptop in a cafe, no one can log in, right? The probability of this attack is medium, and the impact is very high, so I do my best to reduce this risk as possible, even if sacrificing convenience a bit. Okay, and here is another threat. Intelligence agencies can read my correspondence with my friends in messengers. Well, I personally don't care at all, because I don't have any secret correspondence. Well, I can have secrets from my friends or my family or other people, but I don't think that the secrets are important enough for the government to target me. The probability is very low, and the impact is very low as well. It's highly unlikely that the government agencies will blackmail me. However, for some people, this risk may be important. So the whole idea I've been talking about is that you should build a threat model, a comprehensive threat model. You should think of what could happen, of who could target you, um, of what vectors of the attack they can use. For example, installing a virus on your computer, or stealing your mobile phone, or trying social engineering on you, pretending to be your colleagues, and so on. Um, and the benefits the attackers can get if they get access to your accounts, to your information. Uh, this threat model is unique to every person, because well, I have my own values and my own data I should protect, and you may be in different conditions, right? But the thing is, you should always think about it. Always think about it, what could happen, because otherwise, even if you follow all the best practices, and even if you choose the strongest password in the world, uh, but your analysis is not complex enough, you are doing something like this because well, someone could go could go from the other side, right? And it turns out that it's very easy to target people. It's a lot easier than to target large corporations and organizations. Here's the example: the Democratic National Committee hack. It was a rather easy attack. The hackers sent an email to almost all of the Democratic National Committee members, saying that their Google account was compromised. And here's the link where you should type in your password, and that's it. So the attackers could get the passwords of one or two members of the Democratic National Committee, and it was enough to leak the whole correspondence. Another attack, the Sony Pictures hack, used quite a similar approach, but here an employee used the same password for his Apple ID and the Microsoft tool that Sony used to install software on all the computers across the company. And this way, the attackers were able to install a malicious piece of software on the computers and steal all the documents and videos, unreleased films from Sony Pictures. The attackers can use background information that may seem harmless at first sight. For example, Skype used to reset passwords based on the correspondence between someone claiming to have lost his password and the support team. The support team asked a bunch of innocent questions like, where did you last access your Skype account from? Or what is the name of the person you communicate a lot with, and so on. And this background information can be easily social engineered, right? I can pretend to, well, I don't even need to pretend. I can just chit chat with you and get this piece of information and then answer Skype for these questions, right? So while easy at first sight, these attacks have large consequences, and it turns out that social engineering is the most powerful and the most important attack. We can't even protect from it because it exploits vulnerabilities of our brains. It works because we are people. First of all, a social engineer needs to grab some information about you. He can later use this information either directly, this Skype is the example, or he can use this information to build trust. On the screenshot, you can see that this person got married. You can even get the date of the marriage, and later the social engineer can pretend to be some guests from your wedding that you don't remember, right? And use it to build trust. There is a lot of public data the attackers can use. There are lots of government databases that give access to your data for free. There is also black market where you can buy a lot of information. For example, phone call records, flight records. All of this depends on a country. There are some countries where this information is easily accessible, and there are other countries that have laws, and they enforce these laws to prevent this information from spreading. But you should always be aware that there is some public data, and the attacker can use it. Okay. Phishing is one of the most popular social engineering attacks. It can either use the background information gathered at the previous steps, or it can be sent automatically to everyone, hoping that at least one person will click on the link and open it. Phishing is when someone sent you a mail or a message pretending to be someone else. So when people trying to phish you, they are pretending to be some entity who you trust. Here's the example of a Google mail that pretends to point to a Google document. In fact, when you click on a document, a malicious site gets opened, and it pretends to be Google. It looks like Google, but it asks you to confirm your password to access this doc. Well, for example, it might say that your session hasn't expired or something similar. And it's hard to protect from phishing because you need to always remember to check the links. So, and this is the only advice I can give you. And actually, social engineering is very hard to protect against. You should know how these attacks usually happen to spot it in advance. The attackers choose an identity, someone who you trust, or someone who needs help, or someone who has authority. They gather some information from public data, or they can ask your friends and relatives to get information about you, and then they use this information to build trust. And after that, they will rush you into giving out the information. After that, the attackers usually continue the conversation. It's kind of stretchy, but in case of phishing, the same thing happens. By continuing the conversation, in this case, I mean that after you enter your password, you are actually redirected to a Google document so that you don't notice any kind of attack, right? Because otherwise, if you notice it, you will probably like to change your password immediately, and the benefit for the attacker will be not so large. So here are a couple of advices you should follow to protect yourself from social engineering. But in general, if a social engineering attack is done well, you will probably get caught. So our next topic is passwords. Passwords are always a pain. The websites want us to have all these special characters and uppercase letters and symbols, and they want our passwords to be long. But it turns out that people are very bad at passwords. Like, very bad. They use the same password across several websites. They choose easy passwords, like those passwords that a computer can easily brute force. And actually, it turns out that in many cases, the attackers just don't need to brute force your password. The attackers can just brute force logins. So if you choose a popular password, for example, the word password, they can go through all the logins and try the same password. And there is high probability that this password will match for someone. Common substitutions like A for at, S for dollar, O for zero don't work because they don't provide enough entropy. It's easy for a computer to try to come up with all the possible combinations of common substitutions. And eventually, it will brute force your password in no time. But things get worse. Apart from brute forcing, passwords get leaked. Unfortunately, there are a lot of websites that store passwords in plain text still. So when you log into a website, the website will compare your password to the one stored in the database, and in cases it matches, the website will log you in. But websites get broken. The databases get leaked, and there is very high probability that your password that you used a couple of years ago is already leaked somewhere. So that's why you must choose different passwords for different websites. It's I can't stress this enough. Well, the time passed, and people started to think about how to protect the users from the leaked passwords, and the webmasters started to use hash functions. A hash function is a one-way transformation from your password to a similarly random string of bytes, such that the same passwords always hash to the same byte string. And different passwords, even if they are just a bit different, they hash to completely another value. And it is impossible to get back from a hash to the password. Well, the situation gets better. Now, even if the database gets leaked, the attackers can't get your original passwords from the hash. However, they can still see which passwords are the same. So here, Chloe, Masania, and Luntic have the same password. It's clearly visible. The solution for this is salted passwords. The websites started to append a random string to the end of the password, and this random string is unique for each user. And in this case, we get different hashes for the same password. And a step further is key derivation functions. It is much like salted passwords, but they are slow, so that the computers can't pre-compute the hash values in advance. Because there are a lot of rainbow tables nowadays that store pre-computed hashes for all the possible passwords. And there are a lot of computers that compute hashes, and with time, although it is mathematically impossible to get back from a hash to the original password, if you pre-compute all the hash values, you will be able to get back. So the step further is slow key derivation functions that are much like salted passwords, but you can't pre-compute all the values in advance. However, in the real world, these slow key derivation functions are not widely used in modern world. So that's why you should still have unique passwords, unfortunately. If all the websites used KDF, then it would be fine. It would be fine to use the same password everywhere, but unfortunately, it is not true nowadays. So please be prepared for the databases to get leaked. You can even visit a website called haveibeenpwned.com, enter your email address or login to check whether your password from that website is leaked. For example, my passwords got leaked 3 times: Bookmate hack, Last.fm, and a collection of passwords from different websites that is distributed over the black market. So if I used the same password everywhere, all my accounts would have been compromised 3 times already. But how should we live with this? We need our passwords to be unique, secure, random, easy to remember, not compromised. Well, it seems impossible. So people started to develop some tools, some restrictions to help other people make secure passwords. For example, password rules, right? More characters, lowercase, uppercase letters, special symbols, and so on, so that the passwords look more random. As I said, people's brains are vulnerable. People often use common substitutions. People change T to 7 and O to 0 and 1 to exclamation mark, and they usually try to append special symbols in between the words or at the beginning of the password. So these passwords are not quite random. and the rules actually make the things worse. So password hints. Password hints, well, never set them, please, because as we talked about before, there is a lot of public data about you over the internet. So the attackers can easily get the information about you to break the password given the hint. They can even if you come up with an algorithm to somehow encrypt this password, encrypt your password in a hint, in the real world, the attackers are smart, and they will understand the algorithm. They will get it. Please never assume that the attackers are dumb and can't come up with an algo. Recovery questions, same thing. It is very easy to learn the name of your pet, or your or the name of your grandfather, for example, or your favorite movie. It's pure social engineering and public data. The attackers can answer these questions in no time. So, doesn't work. We can invent a formula. For example, we can say something like my Google password for Google, my Facebook password for Facebook, and so on. And in this case, the passwords become unique and easy to remember. But still, the attackers are smart. Please always remember this. And if they get access to a couple of your passwords somehow, maybe through leaked database, they will reverse engineer the algorithm you invented. They will most certainly come up with a password. Remember, they have a lot of trials to make. So formulas are a no-go as well. So what can we do? What can we do about this? Changing passwords every week is crazy. We can't possibly remember all these passwords, and we are likely to write them down on a piece of paper, and this is not secure at all. So what can we do? Well, we can come up with some lengthy password that is easy to remember. It's called HKCD password. It's kind of vulnerable to a dictionary attack, but if you choose rare words and long words, and if you introduce some turbulence in these words, common substitutions are okay here. Um, the length of the password is the thing that matters. So this method is pretty okay. You can choose 4, 5, 10 random English, Chinese, Russian, etc. words, and write them down as your password. And it will be a lot more secure than all these passwords with special symbols and numbers and uppercase, lowercase letters, underscores, and so on. The length is the most important thing here. The NIST recommendation for passwords is that 8 characters is a strict minimum. Well, better use 20. It's a bit tedious to type, but it will save you a lot of trouble. And you can even come up with some absurd sentence that may be your password. And this sentence may contain special symbols, spaces, commas, uppercase letters, and it will be far better than an 8-character password like this. But still, we need our passwords to be unique, and we need to remember them somehow. And it is not possible to remember passwords for 100 of websites and a hundred of applications on your phone, right? So the best thing I can advise you is use single sign-on if you trust large corporations like Google, like Facebook, etc. So if you are okay with giving these corporations access to your accounts, if it fits your threat model, then please use single sign-on. It's far better than passwords. Okay, still need to be aware of phishing, but single sign-on is better. You should enable 2FA, and you should consider using U2F devices. This alone will make you far more secure than just using a bad password. Another approach is to use password managers. You can combine it with single sign-on, and you should combine it with 2FA and U2F. There are two kinds of password managers, cloud-based and derivation-based. Cloud-based are recoverable and easy to use. And derivation-based use these key derivation functions that I talked about earlier. The problem with derivation-based password managers is that if you forget your master password, or if your master password gets compromised, you will not be able to quickly recover from this thing. So if you change the master in KDF-based password managers, you will need to change all the passwords. There is also pass password managers that doesn't fit into either of the categories. Well, we can consider it a self-hosted cloud-based password manager, right? It stores your passwords locally, encrypted with a master password. So please choose whatever fits your threat model and be safe. Please don't try to remember all the passwords. Please don't try to invent an algorithm for your passwords. This is not secure. Our next topic, and the next thing that may compromise your devices, is malware. Malware is something that gets installed on your phone, on your computer, on your tablet PC, whatever. That can make your life worse. Malware can show ransom splash screens, blocking you from your work, demanding a ransom, or advertising something to you. Malware can read data on your computers and your phones and so on. Malware can reproduce this itself over the network and infect other computers if they are vulnerable, if they have vulnerabilities. So you should try to protect yourself against malware. Nowadays, in 2021, malware gets to your PC when you install it manually. Back in the days, malware used to spread itself without your consent, but nowadays, the privilege escalation that malware needs to make has become harder. So how this privilege escalation happen? First of all, if you are on some website, the malware needs to escape the browser sandbox. It needs to somehow get out of the tab. Well, there are several ways for malware to do it. For example, they can use vulnerabilities in your browser if you use a 5-year-old browser. Okay, vulnerabilities can be 0-day, so discovered lately when there's no fix available, but it's quite rare. And usually malware uses known vulnerabilities that are there for a long time. The second way is to ask you. Well, for example, a website may ask you to download a file and open it. And in this case, it escapes the browser sandbox. If you open a malicious file, a malicious executable file, or, for example, a Microsoft Office file with macros capabilities turned on, then the malware escapes the browser sandbox and appears in an application sandbox. Not all operation systems have this application sandbox, but you have probably seen this when, for example, when you install some software on your phone, it asks for permissions. For example, it asks, may I use your camera? May I get access to your contacts? And so on. This is application sandbox. And the easiest way to escape the application sandbox is, again, to ask the user. And people tend to click OK on everything they see. After the application escapes the application sandbox, then it can try to run itself as an administrator. And people, again, allow it consciously. So they click, yes, please run this malware as administrator. And after this step is done, your device is doomed. Okay, the administrator can do anything on the device. So how do we protect ourselves against malware? First and foremost, enable automatic updates so that the malware can't use known vulnerabilities in your programs, in your browsers, in your operation systems, in your phone software. There are a lot of known vulnerabilities for the old systems, for the old browsers, and you need to always update. But you can't possibly catch up in time if you do this manually. So you should enable automatic updates, especially security-related updates. Sometimes the software has a different check marks for security-related updates. The next very important thing is don't turn all the protection mechanisms. Don't click allow if the application asks for permission to do something. You should carefully review which permissions the application asks and whether you trust this application enough to allow running it as administrator, for example. Don't use cracked software. If you download Adobe Photoshop from some website that is not adobe.com, then chances are there is some malware. Chances are that this executable file is infected with malware. But you see the message saying that Photoshop needs to get access to your data, or for example, we need administrative privileges to run the Photoshop installer. And you think that, come on, I trust Photoshop, I trust Adobe, but the thing is, you have downloaded a cracked version and it's not Adobe anymore, right? So please don't use pirated software. Don't use cracks, don't use keygens, because people who make these cracks and make these keygens, they are most likely interested in getting access to your PC as well. You can install an anti-malware software if you can afford it, but please only install the licensed version of the anti-malware software. In case it's not desirable to install an anti-malware software, there may be cases when this doesn't correspond to your threat model, right? It's inconvenient or too expensive, or it slows down your PC a lot. It's okay to not install an anti-malware software, but you should periodically run a check on your computer, and you should always follow the previous advices. The next topic we will cover is man in the middle. We've covered the attacks to you as a human in social engineering. We have covered attacks to passwords, so brute forcing and using the previous passwords and so on. We have covered the attacks on your devices. But in fact, we haven't covered the internet. The internet in pictures usually looks like a cloud. Like you connect to the internet, then something happens, and your requests go to the server. For example, to the Facebook server or to a Google server. But actually, this something is a lot of intermediaries that can read your data, that can change your data, and that can forward your data to other intermediaries. So the real internet looks more like a post. There are a lot of people in between you and your recipient. For example, if there were no protection mechanism, a node, a router could change the data that Facebook gives to you and try to phish you, try to social engineer you, or it can just read the data you send to Facebook, and in this case, the data is not private anymore, right? So mail censorship and mail persistation is one of the oldest professions in the world, right? The same thing is true for the internet. This green guy is the intermediary, a man in the middle, a router that transfers the data from you to your to the data recipient, or vice versa. So what could happen? This green guy can change your data. This green guy can say that, well, I don't want to delete this thing. I want to share this thing, right? So instead of deleting a tweet, it can share your tweet, right? Why not? So this man in the middle can do a lot of nasty stuff. He can change the text of your tweets. He can change the text of your messages. He can swap the image for another image. He can make you look ugly on your Instagram photos. What can we do about this? What can society do about this? Well, actually, people came up with a solution, and the solution is public key crypto. The public key crypto works this way. There is one public key and one private key, and this is a key pair. When someone wants to receive the encrypted messages, he will share the public key, and he will hold the private key to himself and not disclose it to anyone. In this case, anyone can encrypt the messages, but in this case, only Bob can decrypt these messages. So using public key crypto, we can establish a secure channel that's that the intermediaries can't break. We can use this secure channel to transfer the encrypted messages between the server and the client, and the intermediaries can't read the data, but they can still modify the data, right? And well, here is another solution. We can swap the keys, and in this case, we will get digital signatures. We can say that anyone can decrypt the message that I encrypted, but only I can encrypt it with my private key. So anyone can decrypt it and check that it corresponds to the clear text. It's a bit of a simplification, oversimplification, but you should get the idea of digital signatures. So they are based on the same public key cryptography. When you have two keys, the private one and the public one, and this public key crypto is what makes it possible to have secure transfers over the internet, despite having a lot of intermediaries in between. So in this case, someone changes the message, for example, swaps the word love to the word hate, the signature won't match. But we still have one problem. Because when I share my public key with someone, how can this someone be sure that it's me sharing the public key? What if this happens? What if this green guy in between, pretending to be me, tries to trick me into believing that the public key is different? Well, I will be encrypting the messages not for my recipient, but for this green guy. And this green guy can later encrypt these messages for my recipient. And, well, there's no security at all again. We are still vulnerable to this man-in-the-middle attack. How can we overcome this? This problem is quite complex. The most popular solution to this problem is public key infrastructure. Public key infrastructure is how the internet works. It's how the letter S in HTTPS works, right? Because HTTP websites, the communication between you and them is not encrypted, and if you go to HTTPS websites, the communication is encrypted. So how does this S work? There are a number of organizations that we ultimately trust. Their public keys are written on the skies, are bundled into your operation system, are bundled into your browser software. These public keys are known to everyone. There are several such organizations. They are called root certificate authorities. They are the bosses. These root certificate authorities can issue yet another certificates. The certificate is something that that claims that this person has this public key. For example, the website google.com has this public key, and your operation system, your browser, will check whether the certificate is valid. So root certificate authorities can issue certificates to the websites. For example, here the root certificate authority issues a certificate for Alice, saying that this is Alice and this is her public key. It is valid until this date, and here is my signature. I sign off for this certificate. So if you trust me, you should trust this certificate as well. Then Alice can issue yet another certificate to someone named Bob, saying that Bob's public key is this one, and it's valid until this date. And I, being Alice, sign off this certificate, and if you trust me, then you should believe that Bob's public key is this one. So what happens when you visit a website? Well, your website, your operation system, or your browser just goes up a certificate chain and checks whether every certificate in this chain is valid. For example, the website certificate is signed off by GoDaddy. This GoDaddy certificate is signed by another certificate authority, and so on. And if this whole chain of certificates is valid, then your browser displays the words connection is secure. Otherwise, it will display a warning that the certificate is invalid and you shouldn't visit this website at all. So you can go check your certificates in your browser and see if they are valid, right? And see who signed them off. But what happens if you install a root certificate? For example, in Russia and in Kazakhstan and most probably in other countries as well, you need to install the government root certificates to use the government issued digital signature. What it means in practice is that we can build another certificate chain. We can, in theory, if the government, if we can't trust our government in practice, the government, in theory, can issue a certificate to facebook.com or google.com or something like this. And in this case, our browsers and our operation systems will treat these certificate chains as valid because the root certificate is valid. So when you install a root certificate, you trust this entity to never ever trust anyone to, who could try to do a man-in-the-middle attack, right? And it's very important to understand this because returning to our previous topic, malware, if a malware asks you to install a certificate, or if a legitimate software asks you to install the certificate, you should always consider it a possible threat to your online communications, right? So we've covered 4 main topics, 4 main vectors through which you may lose your privacy, you may lose access to your accounts and your data. These channels are social engineering, malware, compromised accounts via weak passwords, and well, the man in the middle. There are possibly other vectors, but they are less popular, I think, and they are probably unique to each person. You should always consider your threat model. You should always try to minimize your risks, and you should make a conscious trade-off between convenience and security. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.